Welcome back to the channel, guys, and you join me today just a couple of hours by the local lake near myself where I live. We've got the 6-footers out today, so hopefully we can have something. I've dropped the baits on a couple of pre-baited spots that I've been pre-baiting for the last couple of weeks or so. So like I say, I'm only here for probably an hour and a half, 2 hours, but hopefully we can have one. I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone who's been watching the channel and engaging in the comments. It's really, really good to see, and it supports the channel. In this episode today, I just wanted to cover a few watercraft tips that could help you potentially land more fish. So what is watercraft? Well, watercraft is having the ability and the skills to identify where the fish are in a certain body of water. So like this lake, for example, today that I'm fishing is a very, very difficult water. There's not a lot of fish in it, so it requires a very high level of watercraft in order to find where those fish are so that we can hopefully entice them into taking a bait. Yes, you can literally just turn up at a lake and set your bivvy up and stay there for 3 days and fill it in with bait, and you will probably catch fish. However, that to me doesn't signify that you are a very good angler, okay? Yes, like I say, you can fill it in with bait and hope that the fish will come across it. And if you put a big enough spread of bait out there, chances are very, very high that you're going to be able to catch a fish. But that's you just sat down, you've set your bivvy up, and you're not doing anything else other than just waiting. And for me, that could be sort of the boring side of fishing. It's each their own. It's their own opinion and how they want to fish. You know, for me, I like to be mobile. I like to be moving around. And utilising my watercraft skills, and that enables me to get better. For me, if you are a good angler, then that means that you can turn up on a very low stocked water, spend a couple of hours in the morning or whenever you turn up, just walking around the perimeter, looking for fish, dropping little bits of bait in, checking on those spots. And once you can use all your watercraft skills and you've identified where the fish are, if you can catch one of those fish, then that's what makes you a good angler. So the first thing on the list of watercraft then is obviously the weather. Now, today it's relatively warm. It's quite mild. I think it's 18 degrees, 17 degrees. So it's quite mild. It's quite bright as well. So that's going to help us with our polarized glasses on, potentially spotting fish in the margins. In order to get to see those fish in the margins, though, we need to be up high, so it might mean climbing a tree or just getting above the water to reduce the amount of reflection from the sky. If it is cloudy and overcast and a bit moody, you know, maybe due a downpour, then this can be really, really good. It can promote the fish into a feeding frenzy, depending on how much rain falls, because it can oxygenate the water even more, and that can have a really good effect on the fish's feeding ability. Probably one of the most effective, I'd say, tricks to watercraft is just asking people that are there. You know, some of the people fishing on that lake might have fished there all their life, and they might be really nice and tell you exactly what's going on. You know, what colour baits they like, you know, if anything. Do they like feeding on a spod mix? Do they just like singles? You know, whereabouts in the lake are they going to be feeding at certain times of the day? So the number one thing for me for watercraft is just ask around, ask the bailiff, ask the people fishing, ask the locals. Really, really good indicator, and it can get you started on the lake. Air pressure is, there's a bit of controversy around air pressure. For me, I'm a big believer in air pressure, and I believe that has a direct effect on how the fish feed and where the fish are feeding. For me, if it's high pressure, okay, so we've got a real high pressure front coming in, then that can signify that the fish are going to be potentially a little bit more relaxed, but in the upper layers, I would say. If it's a real low pressure, sort of, you know, you're in the 900s, then for me, I feel that the fish are going to drop down in those water levels, in those water layers, and push down to the bottom. So golden rule for me is high pressure, high water, low pressure, low water, and that's where the fish are going to be, generally speaking. Next, I'd say would be looking for signals on the water surface itself. So looking for bubbles, sheeting up, you know, big patches of bubbles can signify there is fish there. Not necessarily carp, but there is fish feeding in that area. If you're seeing constant small bubbles trickling up in the same location for a good period of time, then don't be mistaking that for fish. It can also be natural gases being released from the substrate. So if you are fishing on silt, or any substrate for that matter, that can give off natural gases underneath. So don't be mistaken for those single strands of small bubbles. That can be natural. If you're not seeing massive plumes of sheeting up and bubbles, what we're looking for there is inconsistent sized bubbles, okay, in small patches that then stop but then reappear somewhere else a short distance away, maybe 5-6 feet away. That signifies there's fish feeding there. Again, might not be carp, but if there's other fish feeding there, there's a good chance carp will be feeding there as well. Other wildlife can be a massive indicator as well as to where fish might be feeding. So you might have some coots, for example, all huddled up together on the lake somewhere in the corner, and all of a sudden they just bomb burst and they're making weird noises, and it could be a fish has passed underneath them, potentially spooking them. Again, it might not be a carp, but if there's fish there could be carp there. So again, we'll keep going back to that. You know, obviously we can't directly see, unless you're doing the margins, you can't directly see what's out there. Okay, for example, in the middle of the lake, if the coot's all bomb burst, I can't identify whether that is a carp or whether it's a pike, or, you know, it could be anything, but it's worth paying attention to. Another massive benefit to watercraft and tip would be wind direction. Now, this can be massive. If you've got a very, very warm wind blowing across the lake, okay, so we'll take our lake for example here. If I've got the wind blowing in this way, okay, and it's a warm wind, there's a good chance the fish are going to be up this end, okay, so behind me. The reason that is obviously warm wind, you're expecting warm weather, they'll be up in the layers a little bit. All the natural food and bugs and stuff that's on top of the water is going to be drifting that way. So it's a really good area for the fish to feed in. Ultimately, on the flip side of that, if it's a cold wind blowing this way, okay, the fish are more likely to be up that end. They'll be sheltered, maybe in the margins, okay, so pay attention to the margins on the back of the wind. If it's a cold wind, that could be really, really good. Ultimately, they are animals, they're going to want to be comfortable for as much of the time as possible. That leads me on to the next tip, which is margins, okay. Do not neglect margins. Just because everybody else is fishing in the middle of the lake doesn't mean that's where the fish are, okay. Play your own game, trust your own ability, and experiment with things. Each lake will be different in certain aspects, you know, of where the fish are. For example, this lake, we've got a row of pegs across the back and one opposite, okay. Down this end, you can't fish there. It's a massive right angle sort of dog leg with trees that overhang. The fish, there's a good chance the fish are going to be over there, which is exactly why I've got one in that spot. That's why I've been baiting up that spot, because that is the only area where the fish are protected and there's no angling pressure, because I've never seen anyone fish in that area, okay. Everyone just sits on the wooden pegs over there, casts out 10-12 wraps and sits there. You know, if they'd have spent a little bit of time walking around, even an hour, they'd have seen what I saw before, which was a fish surface just over in the corner. Yeah, it was only one, but that's not to say there's more there. So yeah, massive emphasis on walking around the lake. Sometimes I've spent more time walking around the lake than I have actually with rods in the water, and I've caught. You can't catch what isn't there. So even if it's just the slightest signal or hint that there's going to be fish there, it's worth fishing that bit than the bit out in the middle of the lake where you've seen absolutely nothing, just because so and such said, you know, this I caught from there last week. It doesn't make sense. So trust your own ability and hone your watercraft skills. So how do we bait up the margins then? So when I'm walking around a lake, I'll take a bait bucket or a bait pouch, okay, and I'll have some form of mix in there, okay, so a few chopped boilies, maybe a bit of pellet, maybe a little bit of liquid in there as well, just to cloud it up a bit. But the main thing that I always go with is sweet corn, okay, so sweet corn or maize will be in there. Why sweet corn and maize? Because generally the boilies and the main freebies that I sort of throw out for the fish are neutral colours, okay, so it can be very hard to see even in shallow margins with polarised glasses on. So for me, putting a little bit of maize in there and a bit of sweet corn, I can flick a couple of handfuls in the margins under some trees, and then I can revisit that spot, and I know that if there's no sweet corn there, something's had it. So that's probably the main tip that I would take away from that, is to have something coloured in whatever you're chucking in there, so you can identify if it's still there or it's gone when you come back and revisit it. And this lake, it's a relatively large lake, big perimeter, big edges. You know, I'm not baiting up on the pegs. I'm not just chucking it at the end of the peg. It's pointless. I'm looking for little overhangs. I'm looking and thinking, you know, if I was a fish, where would I be? I'll be in the snags, you know, I'll be under that overhanging tree. So yeah, it might just be, you know, the rules on my ticket dictate that, you know, you can't fish other than on a peg, so you can't go into the trees and drop it in the margin, but there's nothing to say that I can't crawl in there and drop some bait in, and then I can flick my rod underneath. So yeah, you know, it's definitely sweet corn in there. It lets you identify if it's gone. So that's a massive thing for me. Watercraft, nobody's a master of it. It's something that you'll just keep developing, but you won't develop that if you just turn up at the lake every weekend, Friday morning, set your bivvy up, cast out and wait there. You're not going to develop yourself as an angler. And I think, you know, don't get me wrong, there are time and a place for doing that. If you work a very hectic job, for example, like myself, yeah, it might benefit from that, but you know, you might benefit from just relaxing. But for me, I go there to catch fish, and I don't want to take that chance of just sat there waiting, because it could just be 3 days wasted. If I can use my watercraft skills, I'm going to give myself the best opportunity to catch those fish. Another thing I'll touch on with watercraft is baiting tactics in relation to what type of rig you're fishing. And what I mean by that is I predominantly fish a Ronnie rig, okay, or a chod rig, so something that's presented 1.5 inches, 2 inches above the lake bed, okay. That's my preferred tactic. The way that I bait with that tactic is freebies generally. Very rarely do I spod, okay. So I'll cast that out and I'll have maybe 15, 20, 25 freebies just dotted around quite a big area. What that does is it promotes the fish to sort of come in, drop down, take a bait, move on to the next one, drop down, take it. So almost very hesitant, but taking the baits, just plodding around. Now, the lakes that I fish generally are silty on the bottom, okay? It can be, you know, 4 or 5 inches of silt. If I'm spodding, then I'll fish a slip D, a bottom bait. Now, some of you might think, well, if there's 4 or 5 inches of silt, the bottom bait is eventually going to work its way down into the silt. Yes, that's great. However, if you look at the way that the fish are going to start feeding with a spod mix, you know, we've got lots of fine baits in there, particles, hemp, maize. It's going to promote the fish to have to grub around in the deck and in the silt, and they will. They'll root down those 4 or 5 inches to get the grub. So hence why I'll have a slip D on there. There's no point having a load of hemp and maize and corn and all sorts of stuff all on top of the silt working its way down, and then having a bright pop-up or just a pop-up sitting above it. For me, it doesn't make sense. I'm trying to fish to what, it's hard to describe, I'm trying to fish to what sort of way the fish are feeding, if that makes sense. So, you know, small particles, spod mixes, they're going to be down in the silt, they're going to be rooting around, rummaging around. Eventually they'll come across my slip D, and then bang, hopefully we'll have a fish. So that's my tactics and my thoughts around baiting techniques in relation to what rig you're putting out there. The next thing I'll say is, don't be afraid to move. Set yourself a time. If you've identified where the fish are, set yourselves a time. If you haven't caught within that time limit, move on. It doesn't mean pack everything down. It just means go for a little mooch. Go, see if you can identify maybe some different locations using the watercraft techniques that we've talked about. See if you can identify another feeding site for the fish. If you have, great, come back, grab the rods. Don't even have to pack them down, just grab them, walk up, set them up there. We're almost chasing the fish around. Just because you've turned up at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning and you've seen the fish feeding over here, for example, You've casted over there. For all you know, you might have spooked them. They might now be over here somewhere. So, you know, just because you've seen them there doesn't mean you're guaranteed to catch it. The fish move. The whole lake is an ever-changing thing, so you've got to adapt with that as well. So I want to talk about watercraft when you're fishing, you know, say rivers and canals then. So it doesn't change a lot. The only thing that does change is we've got to think more about, if I was a fish, where would I be, as opposed to actual signs. Obviously on a river we've got a flow, so we're not necessarily going to see sheeting up of bubbles and stuff, okay? Generally they are one direction, so you know, whichever way the wind's blowing doesn't necessarily dictate where the fish are going to be, unless you can find maybe a bit of slack water that's on the back of the wind, depending on what time of year it is. For me, boats are a massive giveaway. So if you're fishing on a canal, then 9 times out of 10, if you can target a marina, for example, or a row of boats, then that's a really good sign, because generally a lot of food goes in off those boats. Okay, they'll just chuck their excess food overboard and the fish will come along and grab it. Another thing is that those boats, if they are lived on, they are generally going to be warm. So in winter, if you're fishing on the canal, for example, or a river, them boats are going to be giving off quite a bit of heat, a lot more than, say, the middle of the river or somewhere where there isn't a boat. So, you know, thinking about, if I was a fish, where would I want to be in winter, then I'll definitely be under those boats, trying to get as much warmth as I can. Generally, canals and rivers, certainly the ones that I fish anyway, only have one towpath, so it'll be on one side. You see a lot of anglers casting out to the other side, okay, maybe under trees and stuff. Yeah, can be a great tactic. However, don't neglect the near margin. That's where the dog walkers are. That's where the people walk in with their children. If they're feeding the ducks, they're on the towpath side, they're chucking the bread in, they're chucking the food in for the ducks. So don't neglect the near margin. That can be quite deadly in certain circumstances. Another thing I will say is, if you do fish like me and you are mobile and you're constantly, you know, on the hunt for fish, then don't be sucked into just looking at your phone for the entire session on social media, because you might miss something that happens out there. So, you know, if you're sucked in on your phone, something happens and it's not on your spot, you're going to miss it. You're going to sit there and wonder why you've blanked. So it's important to always be looking out there for signs and signals. Even if you've identified, you know, some signs and signals of where you think the fish are, and you've dropped your hooks on those spots, keep looking, because there'll be something out there that you'll miss, and that could be your chance. So that's my little shortish video, I'd say, a little insight into watercraft and a few tips and tricks that you can take with you when you go to the bank. I hope that gives you more success and hopefully aids you in developing your watercraft, because we're all here to catch fish, and the bits that I've talked about in this video, they're not going to reduce your catch rate. If anything, they're definitely going to increase it if you can apply them effectively. So it's not going to do you any harm to take those on board, and just a bit of food for thought really when you're out fishing. Again, if you have liked this video, then please hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe as well. There are plenty of videos coming out, so stay tuned for those. Don't forget to hit the bell icon as well, because you'll get a notification then for when I upload again. If you wouldn't mind dropping some comments below, let me know your thoughts on watercraft and how you approach waters. That would be really interesting to find out. Again, this channel I want to try and develop into a channel where it's almost a little community where we can all sort of come together, share hints, tips, tricks, and hopefully everyone on the channel can gain something from it, whether that be knowledge or more fish on the bank, and we can create a little team. I want to stick this out now for another 45 minutes or so. I'm going to move both my rods now because there's a little bit more activity over there. So I'm going to redo these, get them over there for the last sort of 45 minutes or so, and see if we can't have ourselves a fish. So on that note, thank you for watching the video, and I hope to see you on the next one and in the comments.